Today, I'm going to show you the top 3 soloing secrets I've learned from over 4 decades of playing guitar. It took me a long time to realize how important and useful these 3 concepts are. And by showing them to you now, I hope I'm giving you a big shortcut that takes years off your learning curve and allows you to start playing solos like this way sooner than you might have otherwise. The 3 soloing concepts I was using just now are triads, pentatonic scales, and intentionally moving between chord tones and non-chord tones. These are concepts you probably already know to some extent, but there's a big difference in knowing where to put your fingers to play an arpeggio or a scale and being able to really use those concepts to play solos that are creative and emotional. That's where the real secrets lie. And that's what we're going to explore today, starting with triads. Now, grab your guitar, let's get after it. So we're going to be playing over a backing track today that's in the key of G major. And we're talking playing secrets today, but if I could give you one theory secret, and this is probably the most important theory that the average musician can ever learn, it would be learning to harmonize the major scale. For instance, when somebody says to me, hey, this song is in G major, I immediately think of all the notes in the G major scale. Those notes are G, A, B, C, D, E, and F sharp. But I also immediately think of the triads associated with each of those notes. Those triads would be G major, A minor, B minor, C major, D major, E minor, F sharp diminished. And here's the triad soloing secret that finally dawned on me after hearing classic rockers like Steve Lukather, Mark Knopfler, and David Gilmour, and even a super tasty shredder like Andy Timmons use triads as the basis for their licks and lines constantly in their playing. I know you've heard Steve Lukather play things like this lick from the Rosanna solo. And you've heard Mark Knopfler play licks like this one from the Sultans of Swing solo. Those are fantastic licks, so melodic and tasteful, but the secret behind them is so simple. And that is, you can take a triad, which if you don't know, it's made up of a root note, a note a third interval above that root, and another note, a third interval above the middle note, and a 5th interval above the root. So root, 3rd, and 5th. And you can add just one note. What if we use the 2nd or the 4th interval, and you get a great sounding group of notes that you can apply to chord changes in a key? For instance, that Lukather lick from Rosanna, he's playing over an F chord, and he starts out with the notes F, G, and A. F is obviously the root, G would be the 2nd of F, and A is the major 3rd. And then he goes to C, which is the 5th, and he alternates between that C and the F root, the 2nd G again, and the 3rd A, before grabbing the B flat note, which is the 4th of F. So we've got the notes of the F major triad, which are F, A, and C, but he creates a stronger melody by throwing in the 2nd and the 4th. If we only play the notes of the triad, which we call chord tones, it gets really boring really fast. More on that concept later, but for now, let's apply the concept to our backing track in the key of G. The first 4 bars of our progression, we've got the chords G, C, G, and C, The next 4 bars are D, A minor, C, and then a bar that's split between C and D. Let's start off very simply. We're going to take this major triad shape on the top 3 strings. For G, we'd have the notes B, D, and G, with our root being on the high E string. And for simplicity, we're going to move this shape up and down the fretboards as the chords change. We're also going to have A minor, and the corresponding minor shape would be here at fret 5 with the notes C, E, and A on the G, B, and E strings. Now, all we're going to do over each chord is play the triad starting on the G string. That note is the 3rd. Then we have the 5th on the B string. We've got our root on the high E string. So over that G chord again, we play B, D, G. Then we're going to play the 2nd, which is going to be 2 frets above our root. And we're either bending or sliding up to the 3rd. Play that note again and walk back down to the 2nd and root. And end up on the 5th. So over the G chord, that gives us the notes B, D, G, A, B, A, G, and D. Over the C chord, we'd have E, G, C, D, E, D, C, and G again. Over the D chord, we're going to have F sharp, A, D, E, F sharp, E, D, and A. And over A minor, we would have C, E, A, B, C, B, A, and E. Let's speed that up a little bit, add some phrasing, and play it over the backing track. That's a great sound, and we just used one shape, or what we might call an inversion. Now, we said that triads are made up of a root, a 3rd, and a 5th. We get what we call inversions by starting on one of those notes other than the root. The root form of the triad, we play the root, the 3rd, and the 5th. The first inversion of the triad, we're going to play the 3rd, the 5th, and the root. And the second inversion of the triad, we're going to play the 5th, the root, and the 3rd. Because the notes fall in a different order and we start and finish on different notes, the licks we can make up with each inversion have a different sound. I'm going to play each inversion of a G triad, and I'm going to add the 4th interval, or C, to it. The root form, we've got G, B, C, D, G, D, C, B, and G. The first inversion, we have B, C, D, G, B, G, D, C, and B. The second inversion, we've got D, G, B, C, D, C, B, G, and D. Now, we don't have time to do it in this video, but you want to practice developing licks like this over every chord in a key. You make up those licks by adding the 2nd or the 4th, or the 2nd and the 4th to each triad. Now, I know that sounds like a lot, so start with just 1 or 2 shapes and learn to move them anywhere on the neck. Let's give this concept with the different inversions and our added notes a try over the backing track. That should give you a good foundation for creating triad bass licks and give you a great idea of how they sound over simple chord changes. Let's move on to pentatonic scales and the big revelation that came to me after years of playing them. So a big revelation to me was that just like triads and seventh chords being associated with each note of the major scale, is that in a key we can associate a major or minor pentatonic scale with each note also. And all of those pentatonic scales are made up with notes of the parent scale, or in the case of our backing track today, G major. Going through the key, we have G major pentatonic, A minor pentatonic, B minor pentatonic, C major pentatonic, D major pentatonic, E minor pentatonic. And there's not really a straightforward major or minor pentatonic that we can use over the F sharp diminished triad, but we can combine C major and D major pentatonic to cover all the notes in that F sharp diminished triad. And that brings us back to G. So there's a pentatonic scale within the key that we can play over each chord. And the next phase of our pentatonic playing usually involves trying to play through the chord changes, but not knowing the patterns well enough, so we take the one or two patterns that we know and we jump all over the guitar neck, and that gets old really fast. The big secret I realized about pentatonics within a key is that the scales we use the most basically sit right on top of each other all the way up and down the guitar neck. For instance, if I go up to the 12th fret and I play pattern 5 of G major, or you might think of it as pattern 1 of E minor, I've got the notes E, G, A, B, and D. But if I change just one note, if I change the B note to C, then I've got pattern 3 of C major pentatonic. If I go back to G major pentatonic, and again I change just one note, the G to an F sharp, now we've got pattern 2 of D major pentatonic with the notes E, F sharp, A, B, and D. Then if we realize that G major and E minor are the same scale, C major and A minor are the same scale, and D major and B minor are the same scale, all of a sudden it's mind blown because bam, we've got the notes we need to play over the most used chords in any major key right under our fingers in each of the box patterns. Practice getting fluid moving between the scales like this. I'm here at pattern 5 of G major at the 12th fret. We're going to play through that and ascend up to the G at fret 15 of the high E. And then I'm going to descend through C major pattern 3. And when we get to that E at fret 12 of the low E string, turn it around and ascend through D major pattern 2. And after playing that F sharp at fret 14 of the high E, play through G major again, descending. Do that starting with each of the 5 patterns of G major. Get to where it's second nature to play through those different pentatonic scales and just watch how your soloing ability explodes. Now, I'm going to play through the changes of the backing track, and I'm going to do it in a very clinical way, kind of just running through the scales so you can see and hear them plainly. That's the first step, just getting these patterns down. We can always make things more musical later. Let's give it a try. That concept is just so useful. Let's move on to the third concept that I consider to be a real revelation or a soloing secret. We hinted at it with our triad licks by adding an extra note to our 3 chord tones. And it's that we create movement and emotion in our licks and lines by playing and then moving from a note that's not in the chord that we're playing over to a note from that chord. The notes that are not part of the chord, well, they're always a little off sounding to our ears. There's a tension there that sounds unfinished, like the note needs to move somewhere. And that somewhere, it's one of the chord notes. When we move to a chord tone, we resolve the tension of the non-chord tone. And creating tension and resolving it creates emotion and the feeling of movements in our licks, lines, and solos. Here's a great example. I'm going to play a G major triad with the open D, G, and B strings and move from a non-chord tone to a chord tone so you can hear the tension and resolution. So here's our triad, and this is A or the second, moving back to the root. And that root note, it feels like coming home. Here's C, or fourth over the triad. To me, that note feels very tense, and if I move to the B or the major third, it's a really sweet sounding resolution. Here's E or the sixth over the triad, moving to D or the fifth. And lastly, here's F sharp or the major seventh, and this is another one with a lot of tension going to the root. There's always an extra bit of tension in those half steps, like that F sharp going to G. So it's a great idea to make up licks where you incorporate those. Over the G chord, we might play something like D, G, A. A's a non-chord tone. B, bent into C, which is a non-chord tone and a half step. And then play B, G, D, C again to B. So that's the notes of the G triad plus C and A. And over C, we could play something like C to B and bend it back up to C. So we've got the seventh in the root, and then B and A, which are both non-chord tones, to the G, which is the fifth, back to A, and then D, which is a non-chord tone, and slide it up to E, which is the major third and probably the sweetest sounding chord tone. Practice making up licks like that, taking triad shapes and those non-chord tones and adding some phrasing. Let's try putting all of our concepts together over the backing track and see what we can come up with. Here we go. So there are 3 ideas that I've developed over lots of years of playing and studying the guitar. And while they may not be secrets, they definitely weren't presented to me like this. I kind of had to figure this out on my own. Hopefully, like I said, what we learned today can shorten your learning curve and move you further down the path of soloing and improvising on guitar, having lots of fun, and making good music. As always, thanks for watching. I'll see you soon.